We certainly have had House members and Senate members working very hard from January till now, and the administration as well. We have 3 complete budget proposals that we're bringing to conference and to negotiations. And in order for this session to be different from so many that preceded it, we need to do things differently. We need to continue to drive very, very aggressively. Right now, we don't take our foot off the accelerator. Actually, we push down a little further to get to the point where we can finish on time and we can have the work being done in open conference committee. So we've reached that first additional deadline that we set of May 1st with all of the major finance bills being sent to conference, all of the conferees being appointed. The next big deadline is May 6th, and that is probably the most difficult deadline for us, and that is to give our conference committee chairs budget targets. I expect it will be a very long weekend for Senator Gazelka, Governor Walz, and I, our nonpartisan fiscal staff, and other legislative leaders. All of our conference committee chairs who have the gavel first have scheduled their first meeting for conference committees. And we are prepared to come in early and stay late and get this work done for Minnesotans on time and in public.
Good morning. As the speaker said, the clock is ticking on this session. We have 2.5 weeks to go. Monday is the next big deadline, and the House finished our work 24 hours ahead on the budget bills. The Senate managed to get through its work in the nick of time, and we have been pushing all session from the very beginning. It was the Speaker's initiative to bring these new deadlines to the table in the first place and get agreement from the Senate and Governor Walz. The House has been pushing because we know that it is very difficult to finish a legislative session on time when you have divided government. In fact, it's been at least 2 decades since that has happened. And so we believe in an orderly end of session. We believe in making progress for Minnesotans. We believe in working through the weekend. We believe in getting conference committees started. And as the Speaker said, for all of the conference committees where the House can convene them, we will be convening them today and over the weekend because we need to get started. We would ask that the Senate do the same and convene their conference committees as well so that we can get this work done on time and make progress for Minnesota.
We have time for a few questions before we
Where do things stand with the negotiations on budget targets, and how worried are you about maybe missing that deadline Monday?
We will be meeting today for the first time with the governor's staff and Senator Gazelka and I and some of the top legislative leaders. Meetings that, incidentally, I was pushing for in early April, but we're finally having those, and meetings that I continue to push that should be public. And so the beginning part is recognizing each party's starting position. The Senate has an interesting array of things happening in their budget. They're transferring $1 billion into the Healthcare Access Fund, which to me appears to be an admission that they know we're $1 billion short in revenue. That's why all of their other budget areas are really starving and in some cases not meeting their constitutional obligations. So we first need to talk about some of the extreme differences we've taken to the budgeting approach. Those transfers in the Senate budget are interesting. There's other components of the Senate budget that we need to understand better. Their appropriation for disaster relief, for example, the way that they have it written now, it's a contingent appropriation of if we have extra money when everything else is done, then we have $20 million for disaster relief. Well, we've been having 500-year floods every couple years recently. We had special sessions in 07 for flooding and 10 for flooding with hundreds of millions of dollars of damage in southern Minnesota up in Duluth. $20 million just if we have it laying around after everything else is paid for is not a realistic way to prepare for the summer tornado and rain season. So we need to understand that. The other thing is in the transportation arena. We have taken very, very different approaches to that. The House and Governor Walz invest substantially more resources in transportation. Significant multiplier I'll be able to share with you later today, because what we will be doing today when we sit down is looking at general fund spending, healthcare access spending, and highway user trust fund. And only when you look at all 3 can you really figure out where the difference is and are we meeting the needed investment needs in the state of Minnesota. In recent years, the budget negotiations have been over-focused on the general fund, which is significant, but it's just part of the story.
Could I just add, Senate budget is basically a fiscal cliff that we are pushing Minnesotans right off after their tails spending is done. There is no money to continue papering over the fact that the Healthcare Access Fund is going belly up under the Senate healthcare plan. They use as much one-time money and shifting money around to make it look like it's not the case. But in the years ahead, healthcare for Minnesotans is going to be cut dramatically, and that is not something that we're going to leave unaddressed. So we need to not only balance our budget for this 2-year period, but we need to make sure that the tails, the next 2 years, are also in structural balance. And the Senate bill is a deep, deep structural deficit. So we need to make sure that we are addressing this now and in the long run.
It sounds like you're trying to eliminate the process where the CC co-chairs get together and winnow things down and then bring it to committee. But I'm wondering what happens over the weekend. Are you limited in any way by the fact that you don't have budget targets as you convene these committees?
No, quite to the contrary. That is why we want conference committees to be meeting right away, because we will be looking for the guidance of the conference committee chairs and the conference committees and the people who testify in front of the conference committees to inform the negotiations on targets. In the past, they've done it, in my view, the wrong way in terms of having leaders make the decisions without all of the key legislators being engaged. Those conferees have a really important role at the conference committee table. They need to start to really identify those areas where we're different. They also need to identify those areas where we're the same. For example, in the Health and Human Services bill, tremendously large budget area, right? But on the Senate floor, they adopted Matt Little's amendment to do the Alex Smith insulin pricing reforms. Well, that's in our bill as well. And I'm certain that there are other areas where we line up, and they need to go through the entire House bill and the entire Senate bill and determine where is it that we have common ground. There are lots of little technical things, but there's also budget areas where we have common ground.
Just logistically, will you come out with a target on a budget area and another over the weekend and another, or are you just going for big numbers, as you say, in the 3 funds?
Well, that's TBD. Today will be our first conversation, and I think that, there's a couple different ways we can approach negotiating. We've gotten to the point where we know the size of the table and the first set of people sitting at the table, which is an achievement. So next, we'll be talking about how to make offers to each other and when to exchange those. But I would look for, at the end of the meeting today, at least a clear identification of the difference of each of the entities in all of those 3 major funds. And then I would look for offers being exchanged, hopefully, throughout the evening or as early as tomorrow, and definitely throughout the weekend. The Kentucky Derby is usually a time where you see people wandering around the state capitol in seersucker suits and wishing they were watching the horses, but talking about the budget instead. So that is what we will be doing on Saturday if I have anything to say about it.
It's also very difficult to arrive at any targets unless there is some global deal. So even if you come up with some for smaller budget areas, they're always tentative. And so essentially, you can try to agree on things that are relatively easy, but without the bigger picture, it doesn't really mean much.
Is there anything that you see as non-negotiable at this particular time in the key budget bills?
I don't think that's constructive when people throw out red lines. I definitely have some very high priorities for the Minnesota House DFL, but I think that to preserve the potential success of negotiations, I want to also preserve maximum creativity and flexibility. There's a lot of different ways to accomplish my hardcore objectives, and I think you will see the final budget product will reflect the values of the Minnesota House DFL caucus and what Minnesotans asked us to do here at the legislature. They have asked for world-class schools. We have the capability to provide that, and we intend to do that. They have asked us for affordable and accessible health care, and we have the financial capability in the state of Minnesota to provide that to Minnesotans. And they have asked for greater economic security for their families in their workplaces, and we have the capacity to provide that. And we have the capacity to provide those things in a way that it's been done in other states led by Republicans. I forget the exact number of Republican-led states that have implemented gas tax increases over the last few years. I have a flyer that we'll be sharing later today on that we used in the House debate. And when we have the budget documents from MMB later today that I can share with you showing the 3 fund areas, we will also distribute that. And then we have a summary sheet on the gun violence prevention laws and how many Republican-led states have adopted those.
The government has drawn 2 red lines on HAVA and on the Healthcare Access Fund. Are you on board with those too?
Yes.
Well, it's also
Gazelka has
important-
also said that there's a red line, in terms of the gas tax. He says that there's no compromise potential there at all.
Well,
Tell you, it is not realistic to believe that we won't get out of here with substantial additional transportation dedicated revenue. It's just not realistic when you look at the needs of the state across all budget areas, including education.
Does that mean but you wouldn't entertain dedicating more from the general fund though, to transportation?
I mean, if you want to know what a bottom line is for us, we are not going to send the state of Minnesota's budget into future deficits and irresponsible budgeting. We have done that in the past. We are past that, in large part as a legacy of the last administration. And it is important that Minnesotans have a predictable, reliable state budget for education, healthcare, transportation, and higher education. And we are not interested in deals that will harm the state in the long run, like we've seen from past leadership groups.
Well, and I think it's important to note that is the signature achievement of Mark Dayton's 8 years as governor of the state of Minnesota, is that we are in structural balance. And I can begrudgingly give some credit to Republicans who were also in leadership and did that with him, but we're not going to walk backwards on the structural integrity of the state's budget.
But getting into very specific, a specific tax or a specific spending area or a specific policy and say, no way, never, it's not possible, we'll ever negotiate on, that isn't productive at all. We have to keep in mind the broader goals.
Time for one more question? Go ahead.
Senator Gazelka has asked that you all moderate your expectations before you go into these conversations. How do you respond to that, and what suggestion would you have for him as he approaches this conversation?
Yeah, his team needs to moderate their expectations as well, because many of the cuts that they propose would hit middle-class Minnesota families the hardest. The devastating cuts that they propose in the child care arena, the failure to take care of our roads. If you're a middle-class family bringing your kids to daycare and you need a little bit of help to get by, and you're driving down the roads and you hit a pothole that forces you to get new tires or a new alignment, that is a significant hit to your budget. So I think Senate Republicans have to be realistic that when Minnesotans pay college tuition, or when they pay for childcare, or when they pay for car repair, that is money out of their pockets too. So as state policymakers, we can control how we impact middle-class families' lives, both by investments and by tax policy.
Thank you.
Thank you.